There.
Okay, so hello everyone. Still in the midst of the pandemic, we're doing our author interviews online, and today we've got Anne. How would you like me to introduce you to everybody? Her byline is A.M. Ross.
That's right. That's right. That's fine. Thank you.
And so some background on you, even though this is your first fiction novel, it's not even really your first fiction novel. It's your first fantasy novel, horror novel under this name, but why don't you give us some background about your writing career to date?
Oh gosh, it's everything from journalism to magazine editing, and primarily in the book area, it's children's books and adult literacy. So because I didn't want my young readers' parents picking up this book to read them bedtime stories about werewolves, I thought, I think I'll use a pen name. So I went with an old family name, which is Ross, and decided to stick with that for the fantasy fiction werewolf series.
Yeah, and it's, not that there's anything like adult and inappropriate. It is very scary though.
That's correct. Yeah, it's more psychological than graphic. I prefer to let the readers fill in those gaps. I think that's much more terrifying.
Yes, this is true. Yeah, it's amazing what we'll do with the power of suggestion. So your writing background, when did you get started, and how many years have you been at it?
Professionally, really my whole life. From everything from short stories to, as I said, magazine articles. But I still have a collection of short stories and poetry that I wrote when I was very, very young, 5 or 6 years old. And some of those childlike concepts I may turn into more children's books.
Right.
Because they're really in touch.
Well, and what name have you done all of that under?
Under my own name, which is Maclachlan.
Okay.
It's also very difficult to spell and pronounce. But yes, that's a very distinct brand, very different from the A.M. Ross short story and novel collection.
Yeah. And I love your story, how you got the genesis for this novel. Do you want to kind of tell the story of how that all began?
Yes, I'll try and condense it. It was a dare. It was a group of us that used to meet in the finals of the annual New York City Midnight Madness Flash Fiction Competition, which is a 48-hour challenge to come up with a 1,000-word story. Given your genre, you're assigned a genre, an object, and location. So mine was horror. Why?
Well, didn't you say the last one, anything but horror?
Anything but horror. I sat down to the typewriter gods and said, please, we were waiting for the assignments to come in. Please not horror, because I have no clue. And of course, that was my assignment, horror. And then to make things worse, the location was a moving van and the object was a piggy bank. So what do you do with that in 48 hours? You have to come up with fully fleshed characters, a storyline, an arc, So I thought, all right, piggy bank. What's in a piggy bank that could scare people? Well, silver might scare a werewolf. Maybe this is my story. So that did turn into be essentially the final chapter of what at that time was called The Last Hunter. And so really all I had to do was begin the story and end it roughly there, although it has changed significantly since the first the competition. But yeah, there's a group of us, as I said, who always met in the finals, and one who's now a very, very successful romance writer, brilliantly done. Emma Scott is her name.
Yeah.
And she challenged us all to write something completely out of genre and turn them into novels. And she said, you should take that story made the finals, so you should take that and turn it into a novel. So I did. Just like that.
Yeah.
Years later.
Well, how long from when you made it to the finals of that contest to how many years between that and when this came out?
Well, on and off, close to 10 years.
Okay.
Close to 10 years. I think that's kind of typical for a first novel.
Oh yeah.
It puts a lot of people off, but it shouldn't.
No.
My first 5 drafts were so bad that I didn't even like them. I actually killed everybody off in the first 3 drafts because they were so unpleasant to be around. And I thought, okay, this is not observing the terms of the dare. You know, let's get back into this and take it a little more seriously. And the secret, I think, is to write characters that you actually want to hang out with.
Right.
It seems quite obvious, but it's a little harder to do than it sounds. But that's what I did, and that's where the novel went. So yeah.
You've got all these great stories about where you got your characters and real people who end up in the novel. So do you mind if we take some time talking about some of these individual characters and talking about where you got them from your real life? Who do you want to focus on?
Hang out with some of them.
Yeah. Who do you want to focus on first in here?
Well, I have to give a shout out to my dear friend Greg, who's quite real, and who allowed me to use his name and parts of his character. You know, obviously it's fiction. He's not really a werewolf, but he is a very
you know of.
So that I know of. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking to him this morning. I'll have to check. Yeah, he's the chief of one of the bloodlines, and he made his way in when I was having writer's block around about that 4th or 5th iteration of the concept of the Last Hunter. And we were out having a great Creole meal, and he said, why don't you just write about a vegan werewolf? Right. And I thought, oh, that's just insane. But that broke the ice, and I did. And I put him in it. And then later I said to him, Greg, you're such a good character. Can I please just kind of create something loosely based on you? And would you be okay with that? And he was, bless his heart. He's amazing. And
there's go ahead.
Sorry, that's where Greg came from.
Well, and like all great, good writing, although this is not a comedy novel by any stretch, it's definitely a horror novel. There are these comedic concepts in here, and one of them is as a werewolf, if you don't eat before you turn, you might end up eating various things and like that cause all kinds of digestive trouble. I thought that was really funny.
Yeah. Chipmunks come back on people.
Apparently. I would not have.
Yeah. Well, the idea that, I've always seen werewolves portrayed as man-eaters, person-eaters. And so the way this particular group, there are 4 bloodlines.
There are 4 elemental. Well, there's kind of 3 bloodlines. The 4th one's very, very theoretical.
Yes.
Sort of in the shadows. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But of the 3 tangible, the little group that Simon is in, they really don't want to go around eating people. They don't. Right. So if you fill up before sunset, you're less likely to go after an actual human. In most cases, there are exceptions, as we discover.
Another one of your characters is a real standout character is Jack. You want to talk a little bit about him? Old Jake. Sorry, I'm flipping past too fast. Old Jake, yeah.
Old Jake is actually based on a homeless guy that lived under my balcony in San Diego.
Okay.
He, I would go out at night and blow these bubbles in the gas lamp quarter. You just sit on this large balcony, and I heard this maniacal yet exuberant childlike laughter every time the bubbles drifted down. And then I realized that this man was living in the alcove under, sort of to the right of my balcony,
Mhm.
underneath. I was up high, but I could hear him way down below. And I thought, whoa, that I'm going to file that and use that someday. And that turned into Old Jake. Or as I started to write Old Jake, that came back to me. So I fleshed him out. We never spoke. I have no idea what he looks like. I just got a real kick out of his childlike attitude in the middle of what had to be a terrible situation for this man living on the street.
Right.
You know, so that's where Jake came from.
Jake's kind of your classic example of show don't tell. The personal and psychological toll that all of these werewolves have been through. You know, you don't tend to become a werewolf on a really good day when everything's going for you and you just make that decision to take, you know, it tends to be something that was forced on people, that, you know, it's part of circumstances they couldn't control. And I thought Jake was a really good illustration of that.
Yes, and yet you take that to another level and you have the Firewolves who will actually, I don't think that's clear in the first, in the first book in the series, but they will actually become Firewolves because they have that awful tendency, and it's a great excuse. Oh, it wasn't me, I was a werewolf. You know, and we all know there are sociopaths and psychopaths who will use any excuse to justify their behavior.
Right.
And the Firewolves do that. They're insane. They're really, really off the charts and nuts.
And Jake, yeah, and Jake is he's a firewolf. He's not running with the firewolf pack because he's been rescued.
Yes.
And he's very damaged. And on some levels, he's very endearing and very entertaining. And on a lot of levels, he's very tragic. And I won't give away how his story ends, but one of the things I thought was incredibly poignant is he's often kind of more of a character than a rounded out person because he's so damaged. He's this toothless werewolf, but he gets a few seconds of lucidity right before and right after he transitions, and that's when you get this window into who he was and what kind of person he could have been.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very effectively. I think it'll break everybody's heart. Your main character is indigenous. She's got indigenous and Russian heritage. And what I thought was really interesting is it's kind of cliche to make werewolves indigenous. It's just very common to have indigenous werewolves. I don't know if it's building on skinwalkers or what, but I think you took it in a different direction. Do you want to kind of talk about like what the werewolf mythos, how you used its symbolism in the context of indigenous assimilation?
Yes. Well, I was really careful not to use any indigenous motifs for this.
Yeah.
I have far too much respect for histories and cultures that I don't know.
Right.
And obviously the Ojibwe culture is not one I'm familiar with. But well, to answer one part of your question, the werewolf mythos that I'm using is all based on European and Mediterranean cultures. So that's where those all come from, little elements like calling the name 3 times. Apparently that's German.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, I don't know that I'd seen that before. And that's right there in the first chapter.
Yeah.
Her name 3 times, yeah.
First line, actually.
Yeah.
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 But what this is for Karina happens to be a continuation of the fact that her father was taken away to the schools back in the day. I mean, that actually went on in Canada up until I believe the 1990s, when kids were taken, Native kids were taken from their families and re-educated.
Right.
Awful, awful, awful. What I'm hoping is that all the different characters who have unusual, according to mainstream, non-mainstream roots in this book, I hope people will take a look at what actually happened in those days to those people. It's all real.
Yeah.
It's all real. And it's not just indigenous. There's several characters, as you know, that.
Right. Yeah, you've got a survivor of a Japanese internment camp.
Yes.
I thought that was really clever talking about sort of literalizing the metaphor of being made alien.
Yes, exactly.
To your own. Yeah, you're taken away and you're made into something different.
Yeah, you are an outsider already. So how do you handle that? And then you take the werewolf curse on top of that, and now you're really, where do you find your friends?
Right.
So it was important also within the bloodlines that the packs were not all the same bloodline. You find your tribe, as they say. You find the people that you can hang with and who get you.
Mm-hmm.
And Jake was the classic example. He was rescued and essentially grew up with Greg and his particular tribe of werewolves.
Yeah, because it's not just different elemental essences beyond the werewolves. There's different philosophies about what to do with yourself when you're a werewolf. What does it mean to be a werewolf? What kind of impact do you want to have on the world? Do you want to just disappear? Do you want to, what is it that you do when you're sort of trapped between worlds like this?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that's thematic throughout all werewolf books.
Yeah.
There's there's the ones that love it and they will cause as much destruction as they possibly can. And then there's the ones like Simon who really, he'd rather be a lumberjack, a handyman, anything to keep himself away from being destructive.
Right.
Which makes him a little wishy-washy.
In a very understandable and relatable, and from the female protagonist standpoint, very frustrating.
Very frustrating.
I think every woman is going to be able to relate pretty well to how the female protagonist feels about him.
Definitely. Yeah, he's got such a sense of honor. Well, he was born in a different time. Mm-hmm. So his sense of ethics and honor about protecting the woman who was only 11 when they met.
Right.
He can't get over that.
Right.
He's way over it.
Yeah. She's not 11 anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because your werewolves are very long-lived. Though the book doesn't specifically say, you told me that the book, they're not immortal. They're just very long-lived. They're like kind of lifespans.
I think it comes up once because at one point Karina is really frustrated. She's trying to figure out how old Simon is. He only looks late 30s, but once you're bitten, one werewolf year is 7 human years, or 7, I reversed the dog and human thing.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought you captured really well in this, that everybody from a small town will relate to, is just the quirky small town politics. Do you want to talk a little bit about the town, and is it a real town or is it fictitious?
No, it's made up. There is a place on the US-Canadian border called, it's a little tiny river that separates the borders, and it is called Pigeon River. And we used to hang out there all the time. And I thought, wow, what a great place. Where do I situate this book? Oh, I know, a place that's so desolate and wild. And it's got some really dark, really dark aspects. A lot of kids in that area, at least on the Canadian side, would run away from home. And they would find them in the spring, 100 feet from the road. That's how dense the brush was, and they wouldn't survive it.
Right.
And same thing with car crashes. People go missing in the fall, and they find them in the spring after 20 feet of snow and the dense brush. It's perfect hiding place for werewolves. So I was thrilled to hear that I got the small town aspect right. I love small towns. I've lived in many, and I love it. I really do. But it was fun to write the newspaper.
Yes, that's the newspaper is a thing all of its own. But I thought also what you got really well about small towns is the way they tend to be a little bit, and I'm talking politically, not biologically, but a little bit incestuous. The same people have a whole lot of power. kind of outsized power, get themselves elected to all kinds of various things. And that's kind of this running theme through the book of people taking on all these positions. It's just like really ridiculous, but not inaccurate.
Else, you know, I mean, do you have a pulse? You're the sheriff.
Yeah.
Although the sheriff actually is, he's much more well developed. I mean, he actually earned that position, as you can kind of tell.
Right.
But Big Bill, oh my.
Right. Yeah, there's we definitely need to talk about the newspaper, because there's parts of the book that play out in newspaper articles.
That's right.
Yeah. So why don't you tell me about that? Because the thing is, anybody who has a background in journalism is going to read these articles and have a certain feeling about what you did.
They know it's deliberate.
Yeah.
So far, everybody that I know has recognized that this is farcical.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
It's the point where Adam kind of takes over behind the scenes. You never see that interview, but you see the result where he's saying, no, say this, say that. Okay, and don't forget the trademark sign on my company, and yada, yada, yada. And the whole description of the company is clearly right out of an ad.
Yes.
You know, not journalistic at all.
Right.
I had the best fun, having worked at a newspaper for so long, breaking every rule I could, just to, just because I knew if any of my former colleagues read it, and they did, they got it right away, that this was a small town newspaper. They could see what was happening behind the scenes.
Right.
You know, the guy has a computer, he's the newspaper.
Right.
There's no training.
And it's doing all kinds of unethical things like advertising a private business in a completely inappropriate way. Yeah.
Call this number. Yes.
But I also thought what it did a really good job of is just showing how places kind of deal with their own secrets, because the werewolves are kind of an open secret in this town, and the town has a very kind of ambivalent relationship with them. I don't know if you wanted to go into that at all. About.
Yeah, that kind of runs through the book, I think. There are some people who absolutely believe in werewolves, no matter what part of the country they're from, and others that say, "Oh, go get a life." And they're very divided between that, between themselves. There are little things that I thought were fun, like how to tell a werewolf. And at one point, you could tell a werewolf, according to non-werewolf legend, by whether or not he had a good singing voice. There's another, whether or not he had empty pockets.
Yes, that was good.
Get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are lots of ways, and yet I drew in a few old legends. Like there's one from Europe where if somebody had hair on their palms, they were a werewolf. That only comes up one time, very, very briefly, in passing. It was one morning when Simon's not quite back to being human yet. You know, you have to have a good full blast of sunlight to fully come back to being human.
When you signed this book, it said, "Have you seen this one?"
If you haven't, you're gonna be in a bad mood all day.
Right.
So yeah, he takes Karina's hand, and it's the first time she's ever felt that little fuzz on his palms. And apparently that's I forget what country that's from. Might be Romania, where you're never quite human after you've been bitten.
Yeah, I wonder then what poor family had that genetic variation that got associated with being inhuman.
Yeah, you know, gosh, I forget the condition, but there is a condition. And there are still photographs from a family based in Mexico, I believe, who actually made their living in the circus. There was nothing else they could do, nowhere else they could go. But if you look for the photographs, you'll see that they have the old 1950s werewolf look. And you know, so it's around. There's a genetic thing that is around, and you know, poor people back then. I mean, at least now in the last 100 years, you can look and say, "Oh, okay, let's see what we can do."
Right.
Either help or accept, you know.
Right.
but back then they were stoning people. So
Well, and the small town, I thought you also dealt really well with. There's the locals, that everybody knows everybody, and then there's this constant flow of tourists through there with all the different attitudes about werewolves. And anybody who's lived anywhere that's kind of that's kind of a tourist, a little off the beaten track tourist draw, I think kind of relate to
yeah.
the general vibe.
You can do that. You can come into a tiny town in the woods and talk about werewolves, and no one will think you're nuts. But
Right.
you kind of can't do that in New York. Well, you can, but they'll go special.
It's a different vibe.
Yeah.
And it doesn't dominate the economy in New York. I mean, the thing is, when you have a local legend like that, you have an ambivalent relationship to it because becomes your livelihood as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Pigeon Creek is more of a hideaway. That's kind of where we started. It looks like a truck stop, but it's actually, when you go off the road, it's super upscale, and there's all these amazing houses owned by philandering politicians. That's where they take the people they're not married to. So again, you're back there, hey, who's the monster here? What are you doing?
Yep.
So,
is there anything else you wanted to kind of touch on? Because we wanted to make sure you did a reading at the end of this so people could kind of get a teaser for the book. Is there anything else that you wanted me to ask you about, that you wanted to talk about?
I could probably talk for 2 hours, which is bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything that struck you that?
Yeah, I mean, everything that is popping into my mind, I've asked about. And I know we talked about this, for anybody who's watching, we talked about this a little bit yesterday to sort of go over the kinds of things we wanted to cover. But yeah, just trying to give people who are watching us a feel for what kind of book Falling Silver is. While it is horror and while it is paranormal, it's very different than a lot of the sort of more mainstream paranormal. A woman in a bustier and leather pants would not be an appropriate cover for this.
No.
It's not urban fantasy because it's not urban. Even though it has an indigenous character, it is not about the exploitation of indigenous motifs or anything like that, or painting natives as nature worshiping, woodsy people. It's not that. It's I would say at its heart, it's kind of a small town satire with this horror, just a very deep psychological horror element to it. But the horror is not the gratuitous kind of slash splatterpunk, anything like that. It's more, there's a lot happening in the shadows.
Yes.
Here is how I would describe it. How would you sort of summarize?
No, I think that's correct. It's more of a psychological horror. Because if you know a little bit about life, there's one or two places in the book, what happened. Yeah. Anything that is awful enough to make a small town sheriff with an army background throw up is bad. And we don't need to know why.
And if you're a woman, if you're a woman who's
what happened.
A business owner who, right.
Yeah. I mean, there's things that we just don't need to touch on. And as I said, I was really conscious of the fact that some of my younger readers might be old enough to read it now. And I'm really conscious about not taking advantage of their sensibilities. I didn't write this to shock people. I did write it to make them think, though.
And to be honest, I mean, sometimes when people don't want to shock, they pull their punches to an extent that's a little disingenuous. It's just like, there is this level of horror in the world, and in an attempt to not be gratuitous, you've actually written such a sanitized version of reality, it almost sounds like a better place. This is very real in that it's got the real darkness and the real horrors and all of these things with that supernatural element to it. Yeah.
But when you look at a character like Quincy, who was bitten trying to escape,
right.
In 1862, she and her friends were running away from a plantation, and she said, "As bad as it is, this is better."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and
that was that then,
Yeah, actually, let's talk a little bit about. There's going to be more books, And because you're going to be exploring more of the kinds of people who, I kind of felt like you were using werewolves as sort of a metaphor for the kinds of people who fall through the cracks in our society and have private suffering that we just kind of don't look at as a society. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Thank you for understanding that. I was a little concerned that I was hitting people over the head with my own opinions, but I haven't had any feedback that suggests that. So I'm really glad that it's subtle enough. In the next book, yeah, it's going to be even a little darker than that, although there are one or two comedic characters that are going to.
Yeah, you gave it.
Told you a couple.
Do you mind giving a preview of that one comedic character that visited you in a dream? Because I think
I call this a writer's psychosis, where your characters come and talk to you and they don't come and lock you up for it. Yeah, I was well on the road to an outline for the upcoming sequel, which, as I mentioned to you, will have sensitivity readers because I'm going deeper into some aspects of culture that will need a specific voice, and I don't want to be pretending to be that voice. So I'm deep in the throes of trying to figure out how to do this. And there's this little, I'm asleep, there's this knock on my door, and this exuberant Santa Fe style woman breezes in, plops herself on my bed and said, "We need to talk." I thought, no, not now, I have to work in the morning. But she gave me her whole background. She's a glass blower, and she has a studio on Canyon Road. Canyon Road, Santa Fe is sort of the center of action for the next.
Yeah, it's the gallery district.
Gallery district, yes, and you'll see why as you get into the book, first book a little bit. But she said, no, I have to talk to you. Don't turn over and go to sleep. You know, I mean, it was, I don't know what I had to eat the night before. But
not a chipmunk, I hope.
Not a chipmunk. No chipmunks, no. And so she sat down and gave me her life story and how she was going to be perfect for the book because, you know, I had to tell her story because she is a transitional assistance werewolf. Meaning anybody who's going through this is going to have her spiritual assistance. She's going to drive everybody else in the book crazy, except that every character who's just a little bit off has what I call a secret superpower that's actually very valuable.
Right.
So she does have another side, but she handed me her card, her business card. It's all very floral and it's got beautiful, elegant script to it. And her name is Lollipop.
Right.
So Lollipop, the transitional assistance werewolf, will be
basically the life coach for people struggling with their werewolfness.
That's right. Yeah, because where do you go? I imagine that TV commercial. Well, you're a lycanthrope. What are you going to do now?
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of that going on, and there's some really good characters coming up in the next book. And
sounds like it.
Some surprises, twists and turns. So.
Yeah. In the next book, they come down to Santa Fe. This book takes place up by the Canadian border, but
yes,
the main character, who's a mix of Ojibwa and Russian heritage, is a professional artist.
Yes.
And she ends up down here in Santa Fe, like a lot of Indigenous artists do.
Yes, yeah. Canyon Road's the perfect place for her. And she has an adjustment period because it's just not, I love Santa Fe. I fell in love with it immediately.
Right.
But I can see why some people have a little trouble adjusting, and Karina does. Karina has a little bit of the, she's a little impatient with some of it. And although she ends up loving it, but in the beginning, it's a little tough.
Santa Fe is very aggressively branded right down to its very bones. It is very much about making you feel like you are in a very specific, very exotic place. And what it has done is very effectively made itself the beating heart of Indigenous art and the Indigenous art economy. And, you know, part of what I love about it is it's kind of a concerted effort by everybody who lives here to keep money flowing into Indigenous communities through a respective Indigenous art and architecture, and you know people looking at our backgrounds here, we'll realize we're both sitting here in Adobe. You've got to keep a fireplace behind you, you know, the Puebloan aesthetic and everything like that, which in parts of the city is Covenant, you know, you need to build like that. But even in parts that don't have that, that is kind of the agreed way that Santa Fe is going to look. If you don't like that, you're going to have a hard time in Santa Fe, because
you are,
yeah.
you are. But as you were mentioning, the whole community is kind of allied. So
Yes.
it doesn't really matter whether you're indigenous or not. If you find somebody who is faking the art or faking their heritage, everyone's going to react to it.
Yeah.
That's not just one segment of our city that's going to be upset by that. That's everybody.
Yeah.
You know, there's a sense of this is our pack.
Mhm.
You know,
Great.
you're in Santa Fe, you're part of the pack.
Yeah.
So yeah, but we do get into some Santa Fe history. One of the characters is an old friend of Witterbinner, and hangs out at what is now the Turquoise Bear,
Mhm.
his old house. D.H. Lawrence, and so we'll get some literary background as well as art.
Yeah.
Next one.
So yeah, are you ready to do a reading from part of your book? You had a part that you said most people had the best reaction to. So you want to kind of set up what chapter?
Yeah, there are a couple. There's they both take place in the diner, but I thought it would make sense to introduce old Jake because his story.
Man Feast told, please.
Yeah, you know, I did, and then I thought I just
Or are you doing
actually introducing old Jake, sorry. Which is there we go. Yeah. Old Jake. So we'll hear a little bit about him and what else goes on and what else the werewolves have to look out for. All right. So reading voice. How did you say you met Karina? Simon turned from watching rainbows drip from icicles spiking the eaves and addressed his gummily grinning companion across the diner's splattered table. She give me a sandwich. Old Jake was a longtime acquaintance, many decades now, in the oddest club of misfits that Simon had ever known. About 25% of the food on the worn wooden spoon Jake carried with him never made it to his mouth, and he had no compunctions against talking with whatever was in there at the time. Though Simon felt a great deal of affection for this weakest member of the pack, he still preferred to concentrate on something else while his friend attempted to make a meal. He turned back to try and find shapes in frost patches along the puddled roadway. When was this? Oh, well, slobbered old Jake. She was just about 11 or 12 at the time. She told me so about 75 years ago now. Simon smiled, raided the paper napkin holder without looking, and gently tossed a pile across the table. He examined a lost Yorkshire puppies sign, which was freshly taped to the wall above the table. More like 14 years, Jake. Huh, you sure? Feels like 75. Jake belched and Simon held his breath for as long as he could. I saw her today, Jake continued and frowned. She looked young. She told me about that. She thought you might need a hand. Me. Jake pushed the bowl away finally. Don't need none. Found me a chipmunk or two for a snack last night. He grinned gummily. Simon sighed. Chipmunks, Yorkie puppies, they all tasted the same after a while. Jake, why don't you let me take you to the dentist? Ain't going near no silver filling, Simon. You trying to kill me? The hurt in Jake's eyes hit Simon in the stomach. He made another attempt to explain that techniques had changed, but Jake wasn't going to hear it. They put Sibbler in him, insisted Jake. And you know what happened then? Whoosh! Chili splattered everywhere, across the table, onto the ceiling, and all over the pictures of missing Yorkies. The thought flitted into Simon's mind that the photo probably looked more accurate now, but he brushed it away. Sherry brought over some damp bar rags and threw them on the table with an "I'm not doing it" look. It's not like that now. Simon mopped up what he could as Jake interrupted. Don't you tell me that. One lick of silver and you know. He sat back, arms crossed, and nodded several times at Simon. You've seen it. Simon didn't answer. Right, that's because you know. Remember Jimmy? Remember? It was decades ago. Jimmy had forgotten to empty his pockets. He was young and in characteristic exuberance, ripping his way through the woods and thrilling to his own temporary strength. He'd managed to spill his coins, and one of them, just one, had been old enough to contain a trace of silver. It slipped across Jimmy's left foot and immolated him. Just like that. Nothing else. Not even the dry summer brush was as much as smoking. Flash. That was it. From then on, the pack didn't carry anything in their pockets, and some even sewed theirs shut for a while. That practice continued until the underground rumors surfaced that you could tell a werewolf by his empty pockets. For a while, you couldn't hear yourself think for all the fashionable jingling coins, keys, and who knew what, even during non-cycle weeks. After that, members just made sure to gather and check one another before sunset, before heading into the deep northern woods and succumbing to their relentless wildness. It was a ritual they still observed. The waitress, Shari, returned with slightly raised eyebrow and a trash bag into which Simon tossed the filthy rags. He couldn't fault her distaste, but it irked him to leave a tip when he'd essentially bust a couple years' worth of ketchup and coffee stains off the booth. Thought I saw Jimmy last week. You think? Jake licked his wooden spoon and put it carefully back into his deep overcoat pocket. What do you think happened to him anyway? And he was off, rambling his own deranged pathways, aching without knowing why, chased by the demons of having lived too long and lost too many people. I need to wash my hands. Wait for me. Simon says! You forgot to say Simon says! Old Jake shrieked with laughter, regressing 200-odd years to the small child he had been when his bite wolf had got him. Simon touched his arm gently. Finish your water. Simon says, finish your water. Jake settled, but kept giggling as he slurped. Simon wished he had kept one of the wet rags for his hands, but Shari saw him and brought a couple over. Her look was softer this time. I got a granddaddy like that. She tossed her head in old Jake's direction. Sweet of you to look after him. Your daddy? The diner's bell shook above the door as three rifle-slung men seemed to fill the place, the tallest radiating an aura that enveloped the others and their own self-importance. Hunters. Uncle, lied Simon. I need to get him back to the home before they come looking too. Hey, here's a 10. Sorry about the mess, he called behind him, grabbing old Jake and hauling him through the trio of armed men. He wondered if they really could tell, and something primal in him wanted to growl just to let them know for sure. Where are we going? Where are we going? Danced old Jake, and Simon suddenly regretted the $10 worth of drawing attention to himself. He pushed Jake firmly into the slick parking lot and steadily guided him into the woods. Dark still came early at this time of year. Come on, Jake, he soothed once they were a good 2 miles in, deep and unreachable. Simon says, let me check your pockets. And that's old Jake.
Old Jake, and the book is called Falling Silver.
Yes.
There should be a link posted with this interview. And it is the first of what is going to be several books.
Yes.
Yes. Normally we get to have these events at the Cocteau and we'd be able to have a Q&A. And so we're hoping that for one of the sequels, we'll be able to do that and do a signing and all of those fun things. But yeah, thanks for being a good sport and being willing to do it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening.
No, it's great fun. And so yeah, if you like unusual, different, not your standard urban fantasy, people in tight clothing running through the streets kind of werewolf story, that's what this is.
That's right. Yeah, no bear shirts on the cover. Bear, yeah, whatever it is. Yeah, you're not going to find that.
But that's not to say they're not sexy. I mean,
oh, heck.
Sure they're,
Pick one. You'll find one you like. Thank you so much.
Thank you.